Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Alhamdulillah, we're live for this Wiselife Academy podcast on rising above revenge. So I appreciate those of you who've joined and have just been waiting while we just came online. So going into this, so it's a topic often people don't quite know how to navigate, so to speak. And I think there are themes in today's podcast that we're hopefully everyone will find a degree of relevance, right? Like you may have encountered it personally. You can think of some relevant examples for yourself, and also you may have seen it in friends and family or colleagues as well. But the aim of this podcast is just to have an open discussion around the topic of rising above revenge, right? So we'll touch on some key themes. Again, really thrilled to have everyone here. And hopefully the intention is to also provide some practical insight, because that's really what we strive to do at Wiselife Academy. So for those of you joining for the first time, we are a voluntary organization where we seek to introduce practical solutions and excellence into people's everyday lives through the insights that we've gained both in our professional spheres and our spiritual spheres as well. So we have a variety of trainers today. Myself, my name is Imran Khan. I'm joined by fellow Wiselife trainer and coach Majid Hussain, who's on the call today, and we'll be having the discussion today to talk to walk everyone through this, and there will be opportunity for Q&A as well. So, brief background for myself, just for everyone's awareness. By day, I'm a risk manager, so I work within the financial services industry, coming on sort of 12 years now or so. Graduate from the London School of Economics. I've sort of straddled between sort of chartered accountancy, audit, and risk management. And more by night, I say I'm a qualified mental health practitioner, qualified with the BACP, which is the British body for counselling practitioners. So I hope to bring some of that experience and insight from both of those realms into this conversation today. Majid, can I ask you to just provide a brief introduction for yourself for our viewers?
Of course. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Imran, Jazakallah khair for having me on. As Imran mentioned, I'm one of the other trainers here at Wiselife Academy. In my day job, I'm a partner at a professional services firm, head of private wealth, and a barrister and chartered tax advisor. And I advise primarily all aspects relating to private wealth. So that's what I do in my day to day.
Okay. And I should add, in your sort of nighttime job, as it were, is providing guidance and life coaching, as you've done for I'd say close to a decade or plus or so.
Over a decade now.
That's right. Okay. Excellent. So we have some hopefully some valuable expertise on the call today. So I really want to open this without further ado, Majid, just by I thought it'd be helpful just to, when we think about revenge, it often has these connotations, right? I know me myself, I get sort of like almost like this icky feeling, right? Like, oh, okay, revenge. And there are times where people feel, it's maybe revenge is quite a powerful word, but there are variations of it that people feel that they're entitled to, right? When it comes to when I was thinking about this, the main thing I sort of thought about was around like loss of rights, right? So someone trying to reclaim a right if they feel they've been wronged or hard done. But often there's this this question of sort of where to draw the line, right, and how to maybe protect one's rights or attain them. I've often heard this while almost walking that tightrope of forgiving, right, the person who's wronged you, right, and often, particularly for example as a Muslim, I often find that you can encounter that that almost sort of moral conundrum, so to speak, right? Like where, yeah, we are allowed to pursue rights, but at the same time, that again, sort of looking into the concept of forgiving, and does that mean we relinquish rights, etc. But before we go deep into that discussion, I thought it'd be helpful. Just to maybe touch on some practical examples, so that to maybe bring that concept of revenge a bit sort of more relatable, how people might see it play out. So, I thought, for example, in families, right, we often have fallouts over inheritance, for example, yeah, or for example, when it comes to spousal relations or family members not accepting someone's choice of spouse or something like that, right? But you usually have like a fallout, an estrangement, people feeling that they've been wronged, and then sort of playing out in the sense that people stop talking to each other. They want to teach someone a lesson. That's almost exacting a form of revenge, right? And you hope that's as far as it goes, but sometimes it can go even further, right? You can see all sorts of things. We hear particularly in the sort of South Asian communities, you get concerns around sort of people casting, sort of curses and sort of the term we hear often is like nadar or sihr, etc. So again, as a sort of form of revenge, right, which is then you can see it becomes quite toxic and certainly not recommended, right, as a form of pursuing one's rights. That was in the concept of family. The other thing I sort of had to think about was around, say, in a work context, right? Whether it's a business partner that you could have been hard done by, feeling like you didn't get your cut, whether it's a work colleague or a boss where you feel like you've been hard done for a promotion, cut out of what you're due to deserve. And then again, when you're thinking about how do I get my own back, what do I do to this person? Do I make life difficult for them? Do I set up a HR grievance? Do I just leave and teach them a lesson that that's it? Fine, if you're not going to treat me badly, I'm going to make you guys regret it, and then go about spreading all sorts of things about them. So those are just two examples. The third example, I just thought, just to kind of set the scene, it's one maybe people can relate to if you can't relate to the first two, but with strangers, right? When we're cut up in a queue or on the road, people can often just fly into a rage, right? And seek revenge by trying to exact some form of justice on the person that's done the wrongdoing. So I just wanted to set the scene as some examples. Majid, I don't know if you had any others that you've seen either play out with the people you've coached or whatnot. But again, some of the common themes that when we're talking about this concept of revenge, where people might practically find themselves in that space.
I mean, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, as-salatu was-salamu alayka ayyuhan nabi. I mean, Imran, you've picked up on a number of kind of areas, number of almost a number of aspects that this concept of revenge comes up. I mean, if we go back to where we started, and I think you mentioned that the term revenge isn't something that many people would like to relate to themselves. The concept of kind of revenge as a word is quite strong, and I think where people will probably look to themselves, or where they might find that they sit on that barometer, is this concept of tit for tat. So if someone has done something to you, there's a sometimes the inclination to do something back. And if I go very much into the working world, I mean, I've been working in the city for over a best part of a decade, to kind of be, and I'm very fortunate to be in the position that I am, being one of the most senior partners in my organisation. And there's been many times in my life and in my experiences, and when I deal with team members and colleagues as well as people that report into me, you're going to come across scenarios where people will have done something which you feel that something has to be done back. And I think the topic itself is pretty big. If you want to unpack the concept of revenge, concept of tit for tat, I mean, we could be here a very long time. But I think the key thing I would start with is that, look, with there's a clarity that you need in mind, which is one thing, which is about, one is exacting your rights. So, if someone is violating your rights, and there's a question mark about, actually, I want to seek my rights, I want to get my rights. There's another thing when you just want to get someone back. Someone might have undermined you, someone might have said something to you in a meeting, or publicly kind of demeaned you. That's different. Where you're looking now to avenge that person or do something similar. That's not about you necessarily exacting your rights. That's more about someone, making someone else feel as you felt. And that comes from a slightly different place. And I think that those areas and those concepts are probably easier to deal with, because the one thing that we have this concept in the city, that bring kind of your best self to work, and one of those things is also demonstrating the best behaviors. And that's when I think you could quite safely use that as a barometer, that if I kind of took a step back and said, look, I'm not someone that necessarily would advocate that you become a rug or a carpet and then people should walk all over you. I'm definitely someone that is in favor of people knowing what their rights are, people being assertive about things that they want and what they want to do, but doing it always in the prism of putting forward the best behaviors. That's something that actually, as Muslims, we could really, really relate to. As professionals, we can really relate to, because it is all about ultimately bringing your best self and actually demonstrating the best behaviors. And if we unpack that I think is something that is much easier to navigate, because if someone's publicly humiliated you in a meeting, someone's undermined you, someone's been going around and has been backchatting about your work or your performance, you doing the same thing to them or about them isn't presenting the best behaviors. However, you dealing with certain things, like someone going about things the right way in addressing grievances or concerns, that is demonstrating the best behaviors. And I think that should be the starting point, I think first. And inshallah, we can kind of pick up on a bit more about what I mean about best behaviors, but it'd be just good to get your take on that, Imran.
Yeah, thanks, Majid. So, when you say, I like that phrase, like bring your best self to work. And for me, it's really consistent with this idea that again, I'm just going to bring the faith aspect for myself. Like as a Muslim, you really want to be. I consider like you're almost like an ambassador for faith and what you represent at work, right? So bringing anything less than your best naturally will then sort of create like a ripple effect, right? So you're sort of doing more damage beyond your personal brand, right? You're harming a much bigger brand, so to speak. So then the opposite side is true. Like when you're acting at your best, like and the Arabic term is ihsan, like with excellence, right? That there's a reason that we're that's an emphasized trait or an emphasized way to be. Given that acting with excellence, you carry yourself, you carry a lot, and you hope that in dealing with people with excellence, whether or not they reciprocate it, but you've put your best foot forward, right? And you can look to something with no regrets, right? But I think the challenge I see particularly in the mental health space is people often do second guess and second judge and have regrets, right? Where they think, am I just being the nice person? Am I really standing up for what I should be standing up for? Or I didn't put this person in their place. I really should have given them a piece of my mind. Some people can really get caught into, again, where do I walk the tightrope between, being my best self, being that sort of, you hope that sort of ambassador, right, for of one's beliefs and so on and so forth, versus, well, actually, no, I need to speak up for myself. And there is, I think, I see it a lot in the counseling space that we often go to this concept of, well, be clear on your boundaries, right? So your personal boundaries, be clear. And when we say be clear, it's not necessarily about being clear to others. First and foremost, being clear to yourself. What are my boundaries that keep me safe, essentially? So boundaries aren't things that shut people out. They're things that essentially create safety, right? So
Yeah, I agree. Imran, if I just come in there, I think you've picked up on a couple of points which are key. However, they come before we even get into the boundary discussion, and I think this is a mindset that people need to understand. And whilst people think they're walking a tightrope, so going back to something that you mentioned is that people are thinking like, should I, why am I always being the bigger person? Should I have said something? Oh, I'm being the good Muslim by overlooking. And in many cases, I will say in many cases, that's a complete farce. Most of the time, and this is what people really need to recognize, is that it's not the fact that they are walking or taking the high road. It's the fact that they have the inability to deal with what happened. And that's very different. So it's like, if I could use this analogy that I once heard, when to be in a position to be able to exact revenge, A, you have to have the tools to be able to do it. And B, you have to be in a position to be able to do it. And I'll give you an example. If someone's getting beaten up and the bully's kind of pounding down on them, you or an individual that's getting beaten up and is looking up kind of at the bully while the punches rain down is saying, I forgive you, I forgive you, I forgive you. Anyone that would be observing that objectively will say, well, not really. You're just saying that because that's the only thing you can say, because you're getting beaten, the punches are raining down, and you're trying to say, oh, I forgive you, I forgive you. No, forgiveness comes when you are in a position to do the same thing back to that person. So that's the first thing I want to build out. And the second piece is that and that's why most of the time, if you notice, the reason that we were having the discussion and people talk about revenge and saying, oh, it's not the Islamic thing to do. It's not the good thing to do. A lot of the time it's because, but they're carrying around a big grudge. It really bothers them that this person undermined me and they did this. I don't want to stoop down to their level. A lot of the times it's not that they don't want to stoop down to their level. It's that that they're not in a position. They don't have the confidence. They don't have the articulation, and they don't feel they have the position or the power to do something back. And that's very different, because that is very different because you think you're putting a plaster over something, or that you've taken the high road, but you haven't. It's just that you don't know. And I think the first thing that, a lot of times when I come across individuals or when I do a lot of coaching, the first thing I have to let people recognize is that if you've been wronged, is to accept that you've been wronged, and also accept the fact that you were unable or unable to do something about it. And once you recognize that, then you go through that mental process of, if I could do something about it, this is what I could or would or can do. And when that's mapped out in their mind, and then they make the decision not to do something, that's extremely empowering. And now they've got to a point where they can actually say, oh, I chose to forgive that person. But until they've gone through that process, then actually what they're really doing is it's like the bully and the bullied, i.e. you're not in a position to do anything. So you're saying, oh, I've taken the high road, but you're not really.
Yeah, you know what? That really, really resonates because I've, again, not just from a counseling perspective, but just as a friend and family member, like I've come across so many times I've heard the phrase, "Oh, yeah, okay, fine, I'll take the high road, I'll be the bigger person, but why does it have to be me?" And literally, it comes like almost like with, like in the same breath, right? And I'm just like that. It's exactly what you just said, Majid. It's basically, well, are you being the bigger, like, have you actually like taken a moment to think, hey, I'm going to choose to be the bigger person, and that's going to give me a sense of peace over this situation? Or really, do you feel like it's a chore? Oh, I have to be the bigger person. Why me? And then it doesn't sound like the person's actually done it properly because it's not achieving the intended effect, right? Being the bigger person, by definition, is being above, it's being bigger than all of that, right?
Yes.
Whatever the situation is. Yeah.
And just going back to that point, and being the bigger person means that you are in a position
Yeah.
and have the ability to return tit for tat. And if you're not in that position and you have the inability to do that, then you have to recognize that actually it's not necessarily a case of you being the big person. It's just that you just don't have the opportunity to do something. And the reason why I mention that is because I often come across, especially in the city, especially with people of a certain background, that they have all this. And I use the term like agitators. They just build up all these kind of agitation, all these kind of issues they've had with people, or engagements with their colleagues, engagement with their managers, and it's just building up, and they end up just like leaving and everything else, and they say it's a culture, they say everything else, but basically it's just that they haven't addressed the key bit. So that's the first thing I would say, Imran, just going back to your point, which is, before, just to be clear, everyone should be clear in their mind, am I actually being the bigger person, or is it simply the fact that it's like I said, like the bully being bullied, and the bullied who's having punches raining down on him is saying, I forgive you, I forgive you. Anyone looking at the objectively would say that's just not the case. So you have to come to terms with whether the fact that when you were humiliated, or when someone did something to you at work, did you actually, or are you even able to do something? If the answer to that is no, then we have a different discussion. And then you have to go through that mental process of, actually, what could I do? What can I do? Work through that mental process. And then you can come to the conclusion, now I'm going to be the bigger person. So this is parking that. The second thing that you spoke about, Imran, which I think is really important, actually, was about boundaries, and actually understanding what your boundaries are. But and it's emphasizing that point which you built on, which is you understanding, i.e. me, myself, understanding what are my boundaries. Before, if you don't know what your own boundaries are, you're not going to be able to set them with one another. And this is one of the biggest issues that people have in their work dynamic, in their social dynamic, and in their family dynamic. They say boundaries are such a thing that you should have them between you and your spouse, between you and your children, between you and your siblings, and between you and your colleagues. And all of them have different boundaries, but there should be never a case where you don't have boundaries with anyone. And that's really important. And it'd be really interesting, Imran, to hear from what you generally advise people in the kind of the mental health space around boundaries.
Yeah, no, thanks, Majid. So again, it's one of the key points, and I kind of touched on earlier, was boundaries aren't there to shut people out, so to speak. It's mainly to create a space for yourself, right, where you recognize what's tolerable for you in your life, right? And then if people step into those boundaries, or are invasive, or breach your boundaries, then you know that, hang on a sec, you're aware of what's happening, right? Hey, that's not right. You're able to then judge what's happening. And I know, again, it's almost like spelling it out, right? But sometimes when you are wronged, it's almost like such a shock that you don't realize it's happening, right? And then you can get trampled over in the moment, right? But when you're aware of your boundaries being crossed, and you know it very clearly, then you're able also then to control your response, right? And you're able to just sort of react and respond accordingly and appropriately, and in a way that you don't leave yourself high and dry, but you don't go above and beyond, right? Because that's the kind of the balance, that's the tightrope, right? And people often fly into, anger, for instance. If we touch on anger, right, it's closely attached to the concept of revenge, right? But where is righteous anger, like, or rightful anger, versus like over the top anger that becomes destructive? That, um, again, we know that the Prophet ﷺ advised that, in a well-known hadith, that the advice not to get angry, do not get angry, and it was re-emphasized a number of times, right? But again, um, that is again, we understand from the teachings that, and the insights of the scholars, that there's a particular type of anger that's almost blinding, it's rageful, it's destructive, it harms others, right? Versus being angry because a right has been taken and being clear-minded enough to do something about it in a tactful way that reaches a resolution, right? Um, so the importance of the boundary piece, main first and foremost, is for a person to be aware of what's going on in their own space, right? And you don't have to flesh it out too much beyond that. It's pretty straightforward. Um, but again, we're just trying to avoid the autopilot, um, uh, response that could lead down that slippery slope. Um, yeah. Um, so that's one thing, I wanted to just touch on there. There was also something else you mentioned, Majid, around, if you have the ability to exact your right or to get the other person back, but you choose not to, that's truly taking the high road. And it's funny, as you're saying that, like, I was just, reminded of someone I look up to in my personal, circle, and I remember it's an individual who once said to me that, if I ever get into, an issue at work, I don't recommend this word for word per se, but he basically said his mindset he adopts is, let's take a look at the person. I think, you know what, if we were to go in a one-on-one fight, I could take you on and I could probably win, but I'm going to choose not to. So that was his way. It's his way of talking to himself and talking him out of, de-escalating things. Right? He's just sort of, again, it's probably an extreme version of what you mentioned, but again, it works for him, right? And whatever works for people, so long as we don't condone, physical violence, on this podcast or the likes. But yeah, I kind of, I was reminded of that, right? Where you think that, okay, you did me dirty, I can do you dirty back, tit for tat, an eye for an eye. And we've heard that, that phrase, an eye for an eye makes the world blind, right? But again, we are people, we have rights, right? It's very, very clear. People have rights, and you're absolutely, able to seek them, right? But I think one of the things I'm also conscious about and I often see play out is, particularly around the concept of ego, like self-pride. So, for example, I want to teach this person a lesson, and I'm making it my purpose. And we have, so I can see, so it's, helpfully on this, the screen, that often these types of behaviors can really harm relationships, right? Where you feel that you're flying the flag of justice, and you're wearing the sort of Superman crest, and you're solving all the problems by just doing something about this. But really, like, is it really your job to exact justice on someone or to seek revenge? What is that all about, that ego, need to show strength? I don't want to be seen as a weak person, etc. But the question is, what is true strength? Like showiness versus like forbearance, tolerating difficulty, and mindful of one's relationships, right? So, as part of Wiselife Academy, and we'll be running it, quite soon, in a couple of weeks, in central London, this a whole day course on how to heal your relationships, how to avoid falling into, these destructive behaviors that can detonate a relationship. Because in the moment, you feel like it feels good to lash out, if whether it's in a domestic argument, or I'm going to get this person back, or I'm going to plot to take back whatever that I was lost, whether it's a business profits, whether it's inheritance, whether it's you lost out on a marriage proposal, or etc. Right? But often the destructive path, and this is why that form of anger that the Prophet ﷺ advises us against, is for the reason that it can detonate and destroy relationships. And often some of these relationships are sacred, right? Like, as in we're advised as Muslims to protect and observe them, like the silatul rahim, the bonds of kinship, right, with family particularly. And it's easier said than done as it plays out. But a particular type of anger, particular type of seeking revenge, those types of behaviors can really not only destroy those relationships, but who's the main casualty, right? And it's almost like a rhetorical question here. You can almost see what I'm gonna lead into. But if I ask the question that someone who seeks out to harm another person, and believes that they have the right to do that, but what does it lead to really? Does the person ever get true fulfillment after they've actually done it? Do they genuinely feel good? You could argue that the worst form of exacting revenge, and again, this is extreme, not condoning at all, but for example, murder, or we have in some communities like honor killing, right? But when do those actual, it's an extreme example just to paint the point, which is when you actually exact that form of getting your own back, when does that actually lead to peace for the actual individual who chose that path?
I mean, Imran, you pick up on a number of things there, and I don't think it's as necessarily as binary as you've kind of perhaps set out. I think with all of these things, there's a journey that an individual is going on, and and how they're going to react to certain things is absolutely key. That I would say is the first and foremost. I mean, I'm definitely, and this isn't just because I'm jaded by the city. I'm definitely not a individual that would say to someone to always kind of forego everything, because sometimes standing up for your rights, i.e. your own rights, is in effect standing up for others' rights, so that certain individuals aren't doing this, what they might be doing to you, they might be doing to other people, and they may not have the same level of tolerance, the same level of everyone's different. So sometimes going through a process and standing up for yourself and for your, loss of a better word, your rights, your dignity, is something that, in fact, at times I would encourage and say that people should do that. What I would never encourage is addressing something with bad behaviors, and doing something simply because, i.e. letting your emotions take over. And that is very much when you'll come into, like, anger is an emotion, fine, and it's an emotion that people will have. Is how they channel that emotion, which is absolutely key, and that I think is quite important, because there's no point being a pressure cooker, which is that you take it, and then you explode. That doesn't make sense, and therefore, someone in that scenario, the advice may be, actually, look, you're better off addressing some of these wrongs earlier on, so that you don't explode to the pressure cooker. In other cases, someone, it doesn't bother them in the slightest what's happening. Maybe that is the right person to then say in a work environment to address the wrongs that they are seeing, because it doesn't bother them, but there might be other people that they effectively end up being the advocate for. So I think all of these things, need to be taken into account. What I would ultimately come back to is the point that we were speaking about before, which is behaviors. And, if we take that into, and it's a big thing that's obviously spoken about now in the West, about demonstrating your best self, demonstrating the best behaviors. But really, what that means for us is something about ikhlaq. The Prophet ﷺ, when we talk about his sunnah and the like, what we are really talking about are his behaviors. That is what his ikhlaq was. Is managing situations at the right time, in the right way, at the right place, etc. I mean, I think the definition of wisdom is is 6 statements, I think: doing the right thing in the right way at the right time in the right place, or or so forth. But going back to, if I circle back, I think what people need to understand when it comes to revenge or anything. Yes, there's sometimes the first and foremost is, what behaviors are you going to exhibit? If revenge means you behaving just like someone else behaved with you, then that's probably not the right answer, because they probably didn't exhibit the best behaviors. If you addressing wrongs that have been done, that in itself could be a very healthy course of action, depending on what's been done and depending on the environment that you're in. However, ultimately, where we want to get to, and I think it's the bit that, Imran, that you're kind of coming, which somehow unpacking itself, is that when we speak about best behaviors, what are we talking about? And it's like, for example, what you mentioned: patience, forbearance, tolerance. They're all good behaviors, but so is justice. So is being an advocate. These are all good behaviors as well. Being someone of strength, and that's not necessarily, I'm saying, physical strength, but someone that makes it known that someone has overstepped a boundary. There's nothing wrong with that. And having these type of behaviors and demonstrating these type of behaviors in itself sets boundaries for people as well, and actually stops you getting to a position where actually you go around with, what I say, these agitators throughout life, throughout work, and so forth. Now, I'm very much speaking in a work context. If I just take that back to a family context, that's very different, in the sense that, like you mentioned, familial relationships are absolute key. As it commonly said, you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family. All of these things are very, very much true. And I remember once speaking to one of the leading coaches, I would say in the UK, if not across both the Eastern and Western world. And I remember them saying that if you start getting, because what is tit for tat? It's like you're competing. That's what it's a concept of competing. Or whether that's when they go when it comes to family, that competition amongst family can only lead to a bad result. It's a race to the bottom. And that concept of competing with family, it literally is this concept of tit for tat. And people always think about competing with families. Oh, if they've got a nice car, I need to get a nice car. And again, that's one aspect, and that will be a race to the bottom. But it's also about that concept of revenge. They're treating me like this, so now therefore I'm going to treat them like that. Again, that's going to be a race to the bottom. That is what, they didn't invite me to their birthday, they didn't say this to me, so therefore I'm now going to respond with that type of behavior. Absolutely, that is what what they will say would be a race to the bottom. And again, with all of these scenarios, it's actually identifying when is the right time. Because if these behaviors, if anything that someone does is bothering you so much that it may elicit you responding in a bad way, then that is the litmus test for you to have to address that bad behavior. And then that's a different discussion, because that's about, okay, when's the space where I address that? How do I address that, etc., etc. But and I'm conscious of time as well. But the one kind of the point I would mention, and it's something that, if you want to check yourself and find out if you're someone that's eliciting the best behaviors, and it's very simple. The litmus test is that whoever you engage with, whether it be your spouse, whether it be your family members, whether it be a work colleague, is that after that engagement they've had with you, whether that's discussion, whether you're sitting down together, when you've stepped away or when they've stepped away from that discussion, are they in a position that they have left that engagement in a more positive space? Has that interaction with you left them in a more of a positive mode? If they have, then that's a litmus test of you demonstrating those kind of good behaviors.
Yeah, I really like that, Majid, because funny enough, it just reminded me of a Maulana Rumi quote, which is, "Forgiveness is the fragrance flowers give when they're crushed," right? But the idea being that a fragrance is given. So after an interaction, does someone leave with a positive smell, so to speak? Like, did they get a positive outcome, so to speak, right? And also, it's the fragrance that's given when flowers are crushed, right? So you have to go through some degree of pain to get there, right? I often also use the concept of diamonds are formed under extreme pressure and heat, right? But again, the diamond that comes out is the one that weathered that pressure. It's not the one that cracked under pressure, right? And to crack is to get messy and go down the sort of the what I described at the beginning, that sort of that icky side of seeking revenge, right? You also mentioned, Majid, probably the paradigm of examples for all of us, like the blueprint, right? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we know very well that one of the titles is the Prophet of Mercy, right? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, I'm paraphrasing here, but that if the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam showed harshness towards the people only, then people wouldn't have come to Islam, right? I believe that's in Surah Al Imran. And also we know the example in the Sirah, the prophetic biography of the people of Taif, where the Prophet ﷺ went to give a good message, to give da'wah to these people in between these two mountains. And the response of those people was to throw stones at the Prophet ﷺ till their blessed feet was sort of bleeding right from the sandals, right? And when given the option to exact one's rights, because imagine someone's pelted you with stones and made you bleed, if you had the right to do the same, the actual right that was offered to the Prophet ﷺ was the angel of the two mountains offered to crush that village, and the Prophet ﷺ chose the path of mercy, right? That actually, no, it may be that the offspring may become Muslim one day, and to this day that village of Taif still stands, right? And it has that blessing and hope that the Prophet ﷺ attached. So this is it's like that's like a perfect example. When you act with mercy, that another saying of the Prophet ﷺ is forgive others and Allah will forgive you, right? But again, when I think about this, I think about we sometimes talk about the prophetic example. We sometimes put it in a sort of lofty, airy fairy bubble and think that can I really realistically do this, or was that just for a certain type of person who was favorable with Allah or whatever? And I often think really like the reason we have these examples, these stories, is because they're meant as lessons for us to implement in our own lives, right? That's the reason there's a human being. It's not just a book that was sent down, or that there's an actual living example of someone who acted in a certain way, and then there's a blueprint for us. And this concept of really, like, when you step back, and this is what we teach in the Heal Your Relationships workshop, is this concept that that ultimately the bigger picture of all of these interactions, when you feel you've lost a right or whatnot, is when you're dealing with somebody, you're actually dealing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in essence, right? Because Allah is, we know that Allah is testing us and Allah knows what's best, but we're in this dunya living amongst other people to get to know them, but as a test, right? And who needs to pass that test? It's us, right? That is the bigger picture. And there's multiple sort of teachings in Islam where it's advised that the concept of we should deal with people how we want Allah to deal with us, and even if you have a right, very much into even as far as the Day of Judgment, where yes, you're allowed to take your right from this individual who wronged you, but again, on that day where everyone will be seeking Allah's mercy, imagine that you're able to truly take that high road, and you've done that inner work, and you trust in Allah as well to recognize that and recompense you. You don't seek your compensation from people, but you trust and seek it from Allah, and you have peace with that mindset. That really is is what I'd call rising above and beyond revenge, in a way that you're aligned with what Allah wants for you, with what and how Allah knows best what's best for you, right? And people who can sort of align with that can really taste the fruits of it and the way of living by that code. But yeah, so that's just a taster of what we touch upon in the full day workshop in London. And now I believe we have maybe a few minutes just for question and answer, if that sounds good. So I can take it from, I know we have some comments available on YouTube, so please type into the chat, and anyone who's joined on our webinar platform, feel free to type there as well. So I can see one question. Majid, can you see that as well?
I can. Is it so a question that's been asked is, so what is the difference between darguzar and forgiveness? So my question is, what's the difference between darguzar and forgiveness? So it's a really good question, actually. Darguzar, I think, is a more of a South Asian term, and it's about overlooking. So so basically, what is the difference between overlooking something and forgiving someone? And it's a really good. I really like the question, actually, because and this is exactly what the workshop will cover. Now, both of these things, and it's amazing, they come from where your position is, i.e., where you kind of are on the spectrum. And what I mean by that is that to overlook something is that you recognize what someone has done is bad, but it doesn't affect you. So your level of tolerance, your level of expectation is such that you're like, okay, they've wronged you, or they've done something, and you've overlooked it because it hasn't done. It's not really triggered anything, and whereas forgiveness is when you cognizantly recognize that something has been done, a right has been violated, and you take. It's almost, but you forego that right. And I'll give you an example. So I don't know, there could be something that a neighbor is doing, and they have a commonality, but a neighbor might be violating your rights constantly, parking on your side of the pavement and so forth. Now, for some people, that's a real violation. They can't get to sleep. They'll be cursing their neighbors and goodness knows what else. It bothers them. Others, they might just simply overlook it. They have, and they've instinctively just kind of, their tolerance level is such that their behaviors are such that it doesn't concern them. But that's a state that you get to. Whereas forgiveness is, and I'm talking about from the individual person. The forgiveness is that it bothers you. You recognize the botherance of it, but you take the cognizant decision that actually, I'm not going to let it become a grudge. I'm not going to let it fester, and you let it go. That's ultimately. But to get to the point where you can simply overlook something, that comes from having incubated a level of tolerance inside of yourself, the ability to overlook. That's not a small thing, by the way. To be able to overlook matters, that means that you've cultivated the quality of forbearance, of patience, but also you've also cultivated a very amazing quality which Allah Azza wa Jal, one of his sifats, has, and it's one of the Prophet's as well that's reflected, is managing expectations. Why do so many people get so bothered about things? Because we have high expectations. And I'll give you an example. It's like if you have a friend that is always late. That friend, for some people, it really bothers them. But that person's always late. So just lower your expectation. Still call them to come at the right time, but he's always going to be late. So just lower that expectation for that individual. To get to a state where you can do that with everyone, that's an amazing state to get to. But again, it requires practice and cultivation. But I'm sure that was really a good question.
If I could just add one thing to that, Majid, I really like the expectation thing is so key, because I often find with so many places where people feel they need to seek revenge or seek their right again, you often have an expectation of the individual, right? That they owe you something, that they should know something about you. And this actually just ties, we can take one more question before we wrap up. I can see it's on sort of, where do we start in dealing with toxic siblings? and potentially in-laws as well. I often see that sort of tagged on, so I'm going to tag that in. But again, I would say here there's the concept of and we teach it in the full day workshop as well. So I'll just very high level provide an overview, but the 3 levels of distance model, right? So where one, first of all, because when it's either a sibling or an in-law, the challenge is you're going to see them on a semi-regular basis, whether it's and again, there's the Islamic sort of teachings of, it could be a kinship bond, right? Whether it's a direct blood bond or it's sort of your spouse's family, right? There's layers that can create unnecessary pressure, right? If you're caught up in it. But when you implement this 3 layers of distance model, you can start to sort of extricate in your way in a way that still maintains the relationship, but with healthy boundaries, like what we talked about. So very simply, the first level or first layer is to maintain some physical distance, right? So if you're in a difficult toxic situation with a sibling or with an in-law, generally speaking, some degree of physical distance, like reducing the number of interactions or the proximity, tends to create breathing space, right? And it's easier said than done. Everyone has specific situations, but generally speaking, that's what we tend to advise in the first step. And then you have the next layer, which is to do with mental distance, right? And this ties into what I was just talking about, which is expectations management, right? So where mentally, like you understand the fact that, okay, I may have had this expectation of someone, but really I'm going to lower my expectations so that I know that I don't mentally expect something of someone, then I'm disappointed, and then I sort of get consumed in those thoughts, right? So you're mentally extricating yourself from that expectation. I often find another example is, when I'm on the road, and again, sort of someone can cut you up, and you immediately think, oh, I need to pursue my rights. I need to. One of the mantras I've been sort of starting to tell myself recently is that to help lower my expectations of bad road users is expect stupidity but react with serenity, right? So like, as in, if you just expect it, you manage that, so there's no shocks for yourself, and then you can actually react much better. And then the final layer of which will wrap up this question on, the final layer we talk about, we teach how to implement spiritual distance, right? And this is the concept that that the individual, no matter how much they may have harmed you or whatnot, ultimately cannot necessarily harm your standing and your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And I'll caveat that by saying, unless you allow it to, right, by becoming consumed by it, and then that detrimenting your own relationship with Allah. So it's not necessarily that the person had any power or ability to affect your relationship with Allah, but in the way that you choose to respond, you can either enhance your relationship with Allah or weaken it, right? But we teach this in a more practical, and I've just sort of done a whistle-stop tour there. So that's the, I believe we'll bring it to a wrap up there. Thank everyone for their time. Hopefully there was some very practical, we hope that there's some sort of practical gems in there, and we can absolutely flesh it out in the full day course, which is on the 5th of October. We're running it in person in central London. So if anyone's interested, I think my head might be blocking the QR code, but there is a QR code you can scan. Otherwise, you can also go look us up on Eventbrite, Eventbrite as well, and that and just Google Heal Your Relationships, Wiselife Academy, and attendees for today's course will be we're offering a discount code. So just a discount code. If you type in the code WLA, capital letters, and then 20 WLA 20, you'll get 20% off. So it's normally £25. You'll get it for £20. So a whole day course. We don't run this for profit. It's just really we want to be able to share gems and provide practical solutions to people in need. So that's on offer. And you may have just seen a brief glance as well. on the concept of self-development and transformation, right? To transform yourself above, to truly rise above the need to seek revenge and other detrimental traits as well. We offer an Umrah transformation experience program. So it's a guided Umrah tour with our tour guide and Wiselife trainer, Sheikh Mohammed Mahmood. Sometimes I know our Sad Majid is also accompanies and is one of the tour guides also on this. But the one that's coming up is from the 24th of October to the 3rd of November. And again, the idea of this is that you engage with Umrah, which for many is the journey of a lifetime, right? But often you also hear that people come back from that journey of a lifetime and they're just left being the same person. And they're often thinking, what happened? What went wrong? Why haven't I changed? This is a guided experience intended to get the most out of your Umrah so that you come back with a practical blueprint of how to change, how to make the most of all the barakah that you attain from this blessed journey. So 10 nights, 5-star package, etc. There is, I believe, till tomorrow, I believe there's about subsidized places available, so £300 off the standard package. So have a look. You can Google this Umrah transformation experience, or you can see the website down there, umrahtransformation.com. But yes, so again, thank you everyone for your time. Thank you, Majid, for your time. And we seek your forgiveness for any shortcomings on our part. We thank you for your patience and your dedication in listening, and we hope to reconnect soon. So thank you. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك ونشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.